Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories, as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. To share feedback, suggest future topics, or ask questions for the host or his guests, click the show notes to join the growing WhatsApp community. Now to the show.
Dear friends, thank you once again for joining me on another episode of the Shema Podcast for the Perplexed. Last year, I read some commentary by Rav Avigdor Miller on the Parsha Shemos, and it stuck with me. For some reason, I found myself this week thinking about this very idea. And I decided as a result, based off the nature of this teaching, the idea brings forth that really gets to the heart of why I started the podcast, why I wanted to do my little part in trying to reach out to fellow Jews and help them either connect to their Torah or those that have already been brought up in a world of Torah to inspire them to reach out to other Jews who, like me, were brought up in a void of Torah. My life has been so busy. Thank God my health has been fully restored. My energy is coming back. My mind is working once again. My strength is returning, but my schedule is so chaotic, more than normal. I got a lot of things going on. I'm not going to get into the details, all very exciting. But my days have returned to literally leaving this office at night, going home, talking with my wife for a little bit to catch up on her day, dropping into my bed, and then waking up the next morning to begin again. And with this latest time change, I knew that the only way I'm going to get Torah learning in is if I do it in the morning. Because once the day starts, once I come back from shul and after Shachris, I have the task list is so enormous, the timetables are so tight that I just know I'm not going to get any Torah learning done. However, I do have my daily chavrusa with Morty Roth, which I value so much. I don't break that. But sometimes he can't learn. And I know that if I don't get the Torah learning in first thing in the morning and he can't make our study session, I will study no Torah for the day. I just know. I just get so wrapped up. And it's not my choice. It's just the situation I'm in, the test du jour by Hashem on learning how to navigate everything right now. So with the time change last week, I had to set my alarm clock to 3:30 a.m. So I know I could get an hour's worth of learning in before I work out, before I go to Shachris, before I come back, get my work day in. But I was wanting to sit down and teach because teaching is always one of the greatest ways of learning. And I wanted to discuss this concept, this essay, this writing from Rabbi Miller. I thought it was always so powerful. And so I decided that before I left my office here, that I would set up my podcast mic, leave everything out, and when I came back from shul, that I would see it there and it'd be a reminder, Dan, just break away, sit down and do a recording. I'm so worried about distractions during the day. The only reason I even keep my phone out is because if my daughter wants to reach me from Israel, she is very upset if she's trying to reach me and I'm not available. Otherwise, I'll tell you, I would literally put my phone away because I find it an absolute distraction. And I feel bad because I do miss out on a lot of communications. Even the amazing Shema Podcast for the Perplexed WhatsApp group, haven't really been able to pay attention to it because that's how hectic my days have been, how much task with short timetables that I'm busy working on. But Hashem makes time. When you make time for Torah, He makes time and makes all those things come together. And I will say too, before I move on to the teaching at hand, is that there's a incredible Rabbi Nachman story called The Lost Princess. I had Rabbi Yokov Klein on years ago who wrote a great commentary on this Rabbi Nachman classic. But one thing I wanted to point out was that, in the story, if you're not familiar with it, I'll have to maybe cover it again. But in the story, which is, of course, a metaphor for spiritual growth, the main character in the story by Rabbi Nachman is a viceroy of the king, out to find the lost princess. I'm not going to get into all what that means, but for the purpose of what I want to convey here, but in the story, he is accompanied by his servant and his horse. And in the story, the horse is a metaphor for the body and the servant is a metaphor for the intellect. And some parts of the adventure, he has to leave the horse behind. He has to leave his body behind. And sometimes in our spiritual growth, it's the body is not part of the process, when we're deep in learning or something of that nature, and we're in our battle with the Yetzer Hara. But this area of he left his intellect behind, I always sort of identified as the intellect. And it's one of the things, I think one of the missions I've had for several years now that Rabbi Brody pointed out to me is that he said, it's time for you to leave the intellect behind. Leave the logical deduction behind. At some point, one's spiritual growth needs to go beyond the realm of reason. And I will tell you that this summer experience where I had this health challenge, that the physical part was tough. But what was really tough was intellectually. My mind was not operating. I was had brain fog. For 3 months, that's why I did not do any episodes by myself. I had to bring on guests and lean on them. My ability to sort of organize ideas in my mind throughout the day and build them out, like I've done my whole life, I lost that ability. Things were just not percolating at all. We had a really dry summer, and I was walking on my lawn, and the grass was really crunching hard no matter how much I watered it. The lawn needed to be aerated, and so the water was just sort of running off. It wasn't soaking, so I had hired some people to come out and do that for me. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because that's how my brain felt. The tour was just rainwater hitting and it was just running off. Nothing was sort of absorbing and becoming my own, and I was not nurturing any ideas. And I just had to push through with just pure emunah, with nothing else. I have no strength, my health is gone, I'm lacking for energy, I have brain fog, I'm just pushing through without my servant or my horse. So that story of the Lost Princess, I'm going to have to read it again because it took a whole new dimension for me now. I mean, that experience made me, I think I'll comprehend it at a much deeper level now. But anyway, and a couple more ideas I wanted to share out of the Parsha. And just regarding struggles in life, today's portion was just a story I love. I lean on it all the time. But there's something else. I've read this commentary probably 5 or 6 times. It's in the Stone edition. How much but for some reason I just never noticed it, or it never stuck out or really hit me. But it was talking about the name Yitzchak and how, it means, it derives from the word that means laughter in Hebrew. And about how Yitzchak is known as bringing out the Sephiros, the primary character trait of Gevurah, of strength, of self-restraint. This is something we're going to get into today. And so that would seem to contradict what the commentary is saying. Yitzchak, with the attribute of Gevurah, of self-restraint, of strength, of inner strength, that also equates with a name that means laughter. And the commentaries say they totally reconcile with one another. Because in order to be truly strong, one must be able to laugh the world and seemingly incredible obstacles that may appear to be in front of us. And this ties in to the verses I always refer back to, and it's a story of Hagar going out into the wilderness. And Hagar being removed from Abraham's place, her and Ishmael. Ishmael is very sick. He desperately needs water. She goes to pray, and an angel informs her that there is a well right beside her. The lesson being that the problem she was encountering, the one that Ishmael was encountering of not having water, the solution was right there. There was a well right there outside of her peripheral vision. We always have to remember that no matter what situation is in front of us, whatever challenge, remember, Hashem does not give us a challenge unless the solution is right there. He just hides it from our vision. Why does he do that? Why does Hashem hide the solution to our problem right outside of our peripheral vision so we can't see it? And the answer, my friends, is because it forces us to reach out to him. It causes us to reach out to our Father in heaven, our Creator, and say, help, I need you. It helps us tear through the illusion of this world that we're an independent being. Our purpose for being here, rectifying the original sin, that we are a created being dependent on our Creator. And so sometimes when we get lost in the world and we lose sight of that, Hashem will put a challenge in front of us with the solution right there at hand, just so we'll ask him for assistance, and he'll point to us and say, it's just right there. The solution's right there. And the more we want to grow in spirituality, the more we're going to face these challenges one after another. In order to do this, in order to increase our true desire of cleaving to our Creator, every little challenge recalibrates us back to that point of connection. And to segue into the teaching by Rabbi Avigdor Miller is about how is tied to a verse we say in Elenu, where we say, he did not make us like the nations of the lands. And he really goes into this concept, because what you'll see, my friends, is that Hashem did not make the Jewish people like the other nations. There are certain characteristics. Some you've probably heard of before, but I think some of these that he's really getting into in this writing are those that were not obvious to me at first, but they make total sense. They're definitely characteristics of Klei Yisrael. But what he's getting to with all this is that it shows how the Torah is like a custom-fit suit for the Jew. It is tailor-made for us. Now, of course, everyone, non-Jews alike, benefit from learning Torah. They should learn Torah. The word Torah, as we know, means instructions. Instructions for what? The 613 mitzvos and how to apply them. And the 613 mitzvos correspond to the limbs of the body. The 613 mitzvos are a suit. They are actions we take that we enclothe our body into. We enclothe our actions into. As you'll see, Hashem made the Torah to fit us perfectly like a custom suit. And without the Torah, a Jew can be a very harmful person in the world. So let's get into these specific traits that he is referring to. Now, there are 3 traits that we've heard before, and these are not the 3 traits that he will be discussing. But there are 3 traits that a Jew is known for. 1 being compassionate, 2 being modest, and 3 being kind, which is so absolutely true. I just recently had a experience over the summer where I was putting together for the economics class I teach at the boys' yeshiva. I wanted to do something in order to help the young men know that what I'm teaching them is not abstract nonsense, but actually has practical application to it. So I wanted to bring in some of Houston's most successful Jewish businessmen to come in on a panel each month and discuss ideas that we're learning in the textbook. So the young men, the students, could see like, oh, it's just not some silly graphs that he's drawing on the board. Like, these guys actually use these ideas to make a great fortune for themselves. And we had the first one a few weeks ago, and it was a huge success. But the point I wanted to bring out is these Jews come from all walks of life that I've reached out to. I mean, I'm doing one every month. So I was reaching out to a lot of people. I didn't know. I had friends tell me who I should reach out to, and they all took my call. And these are all very, very busy people. Majority of them don't live anywhere near this community. And once I said, I'm doing this to help out these young men, these young Jewish men, they were like, with no hesitation, of course. Like, once you ask a Jew, I need you to do something to help out another Jew, it's just, of course. There's just no hesitation at all. Once I said, we're here to help out someone. These people are extremely successful, extremely busy, very wealthy people. They probably get calls all the time. But once I gave a call saying, can you do something that will leave a really big impact on a young Jew? Of course, everyone. That was the response. This is the trait of Klei Yisrael. But that's not what we're going to get into. The 3 traits he's referring to is being stubborn, a stiff-necked people, being passionate, and being aggressive, persistent. The Hebrew words sarvanan, stubborn, ragzanim, passionate, tarchanim, persistent, aggressive. All right, so let's get into each of these. You're going to see like how this is so unbelievable, unbelievably true. So let's start about the thick-necked people, the stubbornness of the Jew. Let's put this into context, okay? Every religion, okay? I don't include Judaism as a religion, okay? To me, religion, man-made idea. The origin story of every religion is the exact same prototype. And that is the following. There is a man who encounters either an angel or hears God's voice, or sees a man who had died on the cross, been resurrected and walking around. There's one man by himself has some, experience like this, gets a message from that person, the resurrected dead guy, an angel, God himself. They get some message and they go back to their cohorts and say, guys, you're not going to believe what just happened. And boom, a religion is born. No, prove it to us. We don't have any evidence for this. It's just, you're not going to believe what happened. Here's the story. And boom, you have these worldwide religions. Now, let's look at the story, the history of the Jewish people. It begins, of course, we're in slavery. Moshe Rabbeinu comes. We have the 10 plagues for the Egyptians, the 10 miracles for us. Uncanny displays that Hashem controls everything in nature. Pretty convincing, right? I mean, every Jew and every Egyptian saw everything that was going on. I've seen Egyptian artifacts discussing these 10 plagues, so we know these took place. It's just not in the Torah. There's Egyptian artifacts discussing at the same timeline all these things taking place. Pretty convincing. It came from Hashem and he was controlling everything. But we don't stop there. Then we have the Exodus out of Egypt, and we have the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. And when you study the Midrash, it wasn't something that could have been formed by a strong wind, because it was 12 tunnels that were created. And it wasn't straight across the river. It was in a horseshoe type fashion. We came in one side, we came back out on the same side further up. The ground was completely dried. The walls were clear, so clear that if you were in one tunnel in your tribe, you could see all other 11 tribes walking. If you touched the water, clear drinking water would come out. There was fruits growing. I mean, Hashem like over the top. Now, of course, any thinking Jew who's hearing this for the first time would say, well, how do we know that's true? Which is a great question. And that's way more than I can get into in this episode, but something we've touched on a lot. But there is logical proofs built into the Torah, so we would know this to be true. So that in 2025, we would have evidence, once again, that all this occurred. But then we get to Mount Sinai, the event, the pivotal moment, the time when we were to receive the Torah and become the Jewish people. Okay, this is our origin story. It was nothing really before then. It was up to this point. It was a build-up to receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. That is when the Jewish people were born. That is why the birth date of the world is the first of Tishrei, and the birthday of the Jewish people is during the time Nisan of Pesach. But what happened at that point? That's what I want to get into. Again, we had the 10 miracles, the splitting of the sea, which is totally miraculous. But Hashem wanted all the Jewish people to hear the first 2 mitzvos. They didn't want to hear, Hashem did not want the Jewish people to hear it secondhand from Moshe Rabbeinu. He wanted, and he had to hoist prophecy on the entire Jewish population, which again, they had not refined and elevated their physical being to allow them to hold prophecy and remain alive. If the body is not refined and the neshama gets that type of prophecy of revelation of Hashem, it can't coexist in a physical body if the physical body has not been refined. So what happened? They received the first mitzvah, which includes all the positive mitzvos, and they died, and he had to resurrect them. They received the second mitzvah, which contains all the negative mitzvos, and they died, and he had to resurrect them until they begged not to hear anymore. They begged to let Moshe receive the rest of the Torah. So why was this necessary? And the reason is because if we as a people had not collectively received our own prophecy, even after the 10 miracles in Egypt, even after the splitting of the sea, even after seeing Mount Sinai, see all these beautiful flowers just out of nowhere in the middle of a desert bloom everywhere, even with all that, if we had not received prophecy and received those first 2 mitzvos by getting it directly from Hashem, Hashem knows what we would have done. Moshe Rabbeinu would have come down from Mount Sinai after going into the heavens and received all of Torah and spent the next 40 years teaching us Torah in the wilderness. And we would have said, no way, dude. How do we know that's true? You can't prove it to us. You can't prove to us that came from Hashem. That's how stubborn we are. You see, like every other religion, it's just one guy by himself comes back and says, you're not going to believe what just happened to me, guys. And boom, everyone's like, that's in. We're in. This is a new religion. Us, 10 miracles, splitting of the sea, everything miraculous that was happening at Mount Sinai before the giving of the Torah. And if if Hashem did not give us all prophecy, we would have said, I don't think so. I don't buy it. And for good reason, too. I mean, one of the mitzvos is that once they moved into Israel, that 3 times a year, they had to go to Jerusalem for the festivals. And in all these outskirt towns, they were surrounded by all these enemy nations. They were just looking for an opportunity to steal what was theirs, to rape and pillage their family and possessions. But Hashem said, just go, I'll protect you. The fact they knew that came from Hashem, they said, okay, and never did any of those other nations come and attack their homes when they were gone. In my Jewish community, we're sort of surrounded by a hood, a little bit of a ghetto around us. Can you imagine if everyone in the peripheral area, in the government-assisted apartments, if they found out that all the Jews in this community were going to go out of town for a week, and we weren't locking our doors, we weren't setting our alarms, and the security and police were not going to be patrolling the area, what do you think would happen? Do you think we would do that if someone said, hey, don't lock your doors, we're all going to leave, it'll be fine? No, we would. I don't think so. They would find out, we would come back to nothing. But if Hashem said, leave your doors unlocked, like when Mashiach comes and we all go to Israel for that first amazing Pesach together, if Hashem were to say, don't worry about locking your doors or turning on your alarm, we'd be like, okay, if we know it comes directly from Hashem. But this is why. It's like, we're so stubborn that we needed all those theatrics and all those miracles. Even with that, it didn't matter. We had to hear it directly from Hashem for the Torah, for us to accept the Torah. And it makes us so stubborn. Like we fight everything. In order for us to preserve the Torah for thousands of years, he had to make us, it had to be like carving into stone because it sticks. If you carve into butter, it doesn't stay. That's the analogy he used, which is brilliant. You think about even me, like how stubborn I was as an atheist, ignoring so many clear signs. But no, I had to prove it. I need some proof. I spent a year studying various essays on logical proofs for Torah before I finally said, okay. But on the other side of the coin, it's the point he's making, is why Torah is made for us. Once we know the source of the Torah, we know what it is, we know what it says, you're not going to get a Jew to budge, right? I mean, we are relentless no matter what happens. I mean, you hear these stories of these incredible people that were held hostage by Hamas, and the stories they're telling. They're like incredible. The way they cleaved and held on to their Yiddishkeit at whatever expense. It's unbelievable, but he had to make us so stubborn. There's a negative. Of course, everything Hashem makes says it can be used in a negative way or positive way. But that stubbornness, once a Jew knows, they're not influenced by nonsense. That's why, a Jew that has Torah, and I'm going to use that, like that wearing the clothing of Torah, the 613 mitzvos. That's why these missionaries don't get anywhere and they get frustrated. They have a lot of success with those who are not exposed to Torah, but those of us who are exposed to Torah, they get frustrated. Like, what I'm telling this great story about JC. Nothing seems to work with them. But the other thing he points out is, like, you look at the other nations, and I'm embellishing here some, away from the article. But, I'll share with you, there's a story about these two men. They grew up together. Their parents lived near each other. They grew up their whole lives together. They end up getting married, having families of their own, and living near each other as well as adults. They had their children. They would watch each other's children when the other couple would have a date night, be there for both their kids' birthdays, celebrations. They were best men at each other's weddings. Very tight, close childhood friends. You can only imagine. Nothing could tear them apart, right? Except the problem is it's 1930s Germany. One of those men and their families are Jews, and the other are non-Jews. And the non-Jew, the German, after hearing a fiery, eloquent speech by Adolf Hitler, all of a sudden was convinced that his childhood friend and his wife and his daughters were cockroaches, were vermin that needed to be exterminated. It's insane, but this happened. This is a story that took place all throughout that era in our history. A speech, an eloquent speaker, totally influenced all these highly sophisticated, at the mecca of intellectual accomplishment in Germany, to also believe that their Jewish neighbors were subhuman beings that need to be discarded, thrown away in the most horrific way possible. Look at today. You would think after October 7th that the world would have been so opened up to the plight of the Jewish people and the hatred and the awful work. Hamas had body cams. They recorded the brutality of what they did. It was out there. For certain, with actual video footage, the world would have been so compassionate to the Jewish people and just disgusted and full of hatred towards Hamas for the evil they did. But we know that's not the case. Hamas knows that's not the case. Hamas knows that the non-Jewish world, especially Esav, are very influenced by some good propaganda. Facts don't matter. You can appeal to the emotion. You can change the imagery that's fresh in their mind and block out the real imagery of what took place. A lot of people are very happy right now for good reason, and we should always show gratitude towards everything President Trump has done for the Jewish people as of late. Bombing Iran, being so involved with freeing the hostages. Here in the United States, the conservative movement has power, and they are allies of Israel. I have a friend of mine who recently was in Israel, met with Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Wasn't familiar with him, which a lot of you are probably shaking your heads like, I cannot be familiar with him, because my friend told me that Rav Chaim Kanevitsky said that he is the Posek Hador. Basically, he is like one of the highest ranking Gedolim in the world now. And so I didn't know who he was. I did a search and I found a shir on YouTube that one of his students recorded, and he was saying that Jews who are putting their trust in President Trump are delaying Mashiach, severely delaying Mashiach, and probably creating major problems for us. He didn't say that. The last words are my own. He said they're delaying Mashiach. Because you already see these rumblings within the conservative party of major anti-Semitism, where that whole movement, once Trump leaves office, can be a group of conservative Republicans that hate Israel and are very anti-Semitic. And when I see these things, rumbling, it reminds me of what this rabbi was saying. It was like, it's all up to us. If we are grateful that Hashem influenced Trump to do these things for us, and we're grateful to Trump, but we know that Hashem's behind it all, then things are good. But if we lose sight of that and our emunah turns to President Trump, then bad things happen. Then Hashem shows us you're not ready for Mashiach. And you have to go through some more pain in order to be ready for Mashiach, which means bad things happening. And then we have people on the left and the right. They're predominantly focused on people that dislike Israel, don't want to support Israel and are anti-Semitic. And if you don't think that can happen, then that's where this teaching comes in. The other nations, they're very influenceable. Not all by any means, but the vast majority of the population are very influenceable. Okay. The next trait is we're very passionate, excitable people. We can't tolerate injustice. We're not, again, to contrast us with like Germany, we're not like some, calm, obedient, German who, was told to exterminate an entire group of people and go about it like it's a normal task, like taking out the trash. And you see this in Jews, whether they have Torah, they don't have Torah. Again, obviously these are all these traits that we're going through. You see them in every Jew. It's just how they manifest themselves depends on whether they are wearing the clothing of the 613 mitzvos or not. So that fiery passion, we need that to keep that commitment to the ideals of Torah, the principles of it, fulfilling it, everything that it entails. It's a 24/7 job. Our profession is being a Jew, and whatever business we're involved with that acts as a vessel to receive parnasa from Hashem so we can fulfill his will and give tzedakah and all the other things that financial blessings allow us to do as Jews. But our profession is being a Jew, 24/7. The moment we wake up, the moment we go to sleep. Take some fire, take some passion in order to live like that. And aggressiveness, assertiveness, maybe that's a better word, assertive when it's done right. It takes assertiveness to ensure that the Torah remains pure and uncorrupted. We hold our leaders accountable. We demand integrity, perfection. We need that for ourselves to be constantly doing introspection, refining ourselves, not settling based off our prior accomplishments. We can be someone that did no mitzvos to someone that becomes fully observant, and the fire in our belly, coupled with our assertiveness, and our stubbornness is going to push us just as hard to go to the next level of spiritual growth as we did when we were beginning our journey. You see, these three things are just essential. And we received the Torah, and the Torah is called a fire from his right hand. And the Gemara teaches that Hashem gave a Torah fire to a people of fire, stubborn, passionate, assertive. We're a people of fire, and we need a Torah of fire to contain us. That Jewish temperament, a fiery intensity, it needs the Torah to channel it constructively. And without the Torah, that nature of a Jew causes the Jew to destroy himself and the world around him. The Torah disciplines that energy towards holiness and creation. And you look at Jews who were not exposed to Torah, all that fire, not housed, contained, channeled within the 613 mitzvos. Without that clothing of Torah, horrible things ensue. I mean, look at people, you can just go through history and look at these notable Jews that did so much destruction because they were not exposed to Torah. Like Karl Marx, the idea of Marxism. Good people in New York just elected one as their mayor. Sorry, my dear New York residing Jews. But the idea of Marxism is that about collective ownership of the means of production. The idea that no one should exploit another and resources should be shared. But Karl Marx had that idea, that fiery idea that made a big impact on the world, a very destructive impact, because it was based in atheism. But there's part of it that's true. If he had taken that idea, that passion for what he was yearning for, that part of Torah he remembered from in utero, that all of Israel are responsible for one another, that is our Torah. But he didn't know how to channel that properly, and it manifested in the world in a very ugly way. I even think of modern times. Sadly, a Jewish name that won't go away from the news is Jeffrey Epstein. But just imagine if he had been brought up in a Torah environment. If that fiery nature of his had been housed, clothed in the 613 mitzvos, he probably would have been one of the greatest Torah scholars of our generation. It was just fiery Jew not channeled properly. You see this over and over again. This is why I was sort of saying at the beginning why this podcast is important to me, to try to do my part in reaching out to Jews. Jews need mitzvos. They need the 613 mitzvos. They need that clothing. They may look at it like a straitjacket, but it's really a custom-made suit, a divine one. We need that self-discipline that it teaches us. It harnesses the energy, channels it. Every halakha, Shabbos, kashrus, shatnez, it all teaches restraint. One of the things that Rabbi Miller brings up is he gives the example of a young child who's brought up in a kosher home who has some meat for lunch and then goes by and sees an ice cream store. It doesn't really, this was written, I think, in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Rabbi Miller doesn't know that, in our era, we have this incredible non-dairy ice cream now. But back then, they didn't have that. Can you imagine being a young kid? You have meat, and then you have to learn the discipline, you can't have the ice cream for 6 hours. At a young age, you're teaching, the children are learning this type of restraint. And even now, just, in teaching kids too, even today, when they go to the store and you can see them going through the candy aisle, they're looking for the hechsher. You can't just take anything. They're learning this at 7, 8 years old. They're learning this discipline, harnessing our fiery nature in the fire of Torah. He did not make us like the other nations, and he gave us a Torah, my friends. The Jewish people connected with their Torah are unstoppable. That fire within each of us, the stubbornness, the refusal to give in under any situation, to hold on to our Torah, not give up under any conditions. The passion to grow and try to be a positive influence on others. The assertiveness to continue to work on ourselves. And when it comes to our spirituality and our Yiddishkeit, to never be satisfied. When we have the Torah, we harness all those things, all for greatness. And so through the Torah, that fire in each of us ascends eternally back to its divine source. And we fulfill our mission in this world of bridging and connecting the physical with the spiritual. Thank you once again for listening, my friends.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.